Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Evelyn of Pink Sheep Design, and today I'm going to be showing you guys a tutorial on how to add pockets to my mini puff jacket. So this is the mini puff jacket, and these are the pockets. So I have not done a tutorial on how I add these pockets yet, so this is it, and we are going to flip the camera around and get started. Okay guys, we are here to attach these lovely little pockets onto this sweater here. This is my mini puff jacket, the little sister of my power puff jacket. And I wanted to mimic a hoodie pocket. So I created these two separate pockets that together would look like a hoodie pocket, but separated them out. And you can find the instructions on how to make these by purchasing this pattern. Yeah, so today I wanted to share how I actually attach these. And if you hear noise in the background, my husband is actually playing video games with friends right now. So that's what you hear if you hear anything, any talking in the background behind me. So I like to leave a really long tail. So when I finished this pocket here, so let's see if I can show this to you. You can see the shape here. I left a really long tail when I tied off. So you can see I've got this whole handful here. This is what I'm going to use to actually sew the pocket onto the jacket here. The first thing that I like to do, especially when you're working with this kind of yarn, this is not easy yarn to work with. It's difficult to see your stitches. You know, the good news is you don't have to be super precise when you're sewing this on because of the fact that you can't really see specific stitches, but it can be a little aggravating. So take your time, breathe, don't get into a rush. You know, it's going to be okay. You will get this attached. But I like to start by lining it up on the very edge of my jacket. And then you can also use stitch markers. So I use these little 3D printed stitch markers. We have these in our Etsy shop. They're a super big help. You've got your little opening, but these will slide through the stitches. So I'm going to place these on each corner. Now again, you really have to kind of feel around for your stitch here, but I'm going to find a placeholder, and then I'm going to find a placeholder on the front border where I can attach this stitch marker through both. And our stitch markers are made to use with bulky yarn. This cardigan is made using a size 6 super bulky yarn. So you've actually got two sections of super bulky yarn that you're working through. So you will need a pretty large stitch marker if that's what you're going to use. But you could also use pieces of string. So if you have extra pieces of yarn, you could actually tie them through. You can use a tapestry needle and tie those spots in. So I'm going to do this on each corner here. All right, there we go. So I've got two corners placed. So now I'm going to come down here to the bottom. I'm going to add another stitch marker, and it can be easier, instead of trying to thread the needle through both sides, you can start on one piece. So I'm actually going to go through the pocket first, and then I'm going to make sure that I'm lined up, and then I'm going to try to find a spot underneath on the bottom piece. Now that is all lined up, and I am going to place another stitch marker here in this corner. This one's a little tougher because it's not on the outer edge, so you're really going to have to kind of put your hand underneath and feel for where that's going to attach. But again, I use the same technique. I'm going to start here on the actual pocket and attach that, and then I can bring my hand under and I can just kind of feel around for the stitch marker to come through, and then pull it through the top. There we go. So now I'm attached. The only place I'm not attached is right here at the top, but that is where I'm going to be starting, since this is where my yarn is. So I'm not super concerned about having it there. So I'm going to make sure that this is, again, checking to make sure I'm lined up, taking my time. I don't want to feel rushed. And then I'm going to take my nice long tail, and I'm going to go ahead and grab a tapestry needle. You can use any tapestry needle you like for this, but it's nice to find some that have nice large openings for this chunkier yarn. We do make some 3D printed tapestry needles that are flexible, that make it pretty easy to slip that through. You can find those in our Etsy shop as well. All right, so I'm going to thread my tapestry needle, and I'm going to start by, and this type of stitch is actually referred to as a tacking stitch or a basting stitch in sewing. So if you look those terms up, that is what we are going to be using, a similar stitch to that. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go through the front side of the pocket. And I always try to go underneath at least 2 strands of yarn just to give it some stability. And then I'm actually going to, I'm not even going to look, I'm going to turn my needle straight down and I'm going to poke it through, okay? And then I'm going to pull the needle through. There we go. And then I'm actually going to carefully flip my work over and see where this came out on this side. And then I'm going to choose a spot right next to it, making sure that I'm not going straight back into the same opening, but I'm over a little bit. And I'm going to poke that through. And I'm actually going to see where it comes out first on just the front border. And then I'm going to poke it from the back to the front through the pocket. This just really allows me to make sure that that placement is right where I want it to be and gives me a little more control. Now you can do that from the front side as well. So this time I'm just going to come through the pocket. I'm actually going to scoop underneath. You can see this coming out. I'm going to go through the pocket first, and then I'm going to look behind it. I'm going to kind of see, I can kind of see here where this was attached. And again, you can't really see this yarn, so I'm going to feel around and say, okay, I went through that hole. I'm going to come over and find another opening in the stitches, and I'm going to poke that yarn through, pull it all the way through, and I make sure I'm pulling tight as I go, but I make sure that I'm not cinching. So you don't want to pull so tight that you start to actually cinch your fabric together, because that is going to affect the fit and how your fabric lays flat in the end. All right, so I'm back to the other side. I'm going to flip this over again. I can see where I pulled that yarn through, so I'm going to try to feel over a little bit and find the next opening. Make sure I'm not going through the same hole. And then I'm going to pull it through the front border of my jacket first, and then I'm going to feel for the next hole in my pocket and go back to front and pull that yarn through the pocket. Just like that. All right, so now I am to the corner stitch, right around where my stitch marker is placed. So I'm going to come through front to back on the pocket. And then I am going to find a space that I can go through on the front border close to the edge and pull that through front to back. Make sure again that it's pulled taut but not too tight. I'm not cinching my pocket together. I'm not creating creases in this front border. But now I can feel, if I put my fingers underneath this side and this side, I can feel that that is solidly attached. And since I left a tail, I'm not having to worry that I have to weave in an end here, because this is my big long end. So that's pretty nice as well. So now that I have gotten into this corner, and another tip, I do like to, with this kind of yarn, I do like to kind of secure this corner stitch a little more. So I'm going to flip this over, and I'm actually going to find a space above where this went through. So I'm going to go one stitch above, pull that through the front border, and then go back through, and I'm actually going to go straight through this time. I'm going to go through the pocket, straight through the front border, pull that through, and that just gives me another secure stitch right here on the corner of the pocket, where you're going to need the most security for this pocket to stay in place. So now that I have secured my corner, I can actually remove my stitch marker because I no longer need it there. And I'm going to continue doing the same thing down the side, okay? And I'm going to keep checking in to make sure that everything is still nice and even along the sides. Again, the main thing is just having patience and not rushing the process when you're doing this. All right, so for this one, I actually came out on the underside. So I'm going to find the next spot down, coming down the front border now. I'm going to come through the front border first from back to front. Whoop. Losing my yarn, and then I'm going to come through the pocket from back to front, trying to line up those stitches that I'm going through there. Okay. All right, now going from front to back, I'm going to find the next stitch down. I'm just going to feel with my fingers to find that next opening and go front to back into the pocket. And then I'm going to flip that open and feel for the next opening on the front border and go front to back. Okay. So this is creating that nice stitch, and it's, you know, because of this yarn, it's fairly invisible with this yarn because again, you can't really see your stitches. I definitely feel like with this one, if you're using a yarn that's a little easier to see the stitches, then you want to make sure you're using the exact same yarn or a nice complementing color because you will see these stitches, especially if you use a totally different color because of the way that these stitches are placed. All right, so the next one I ended on the back side, so I'm going to go back to front for the next one. And again, I'm going to go through the front panel first. And then I'm going to make sure that I go into the very next space, back to front, into the front pocket. And again, I just kind of tighten as I go. I make sure that I'm not pulling it too tight, but I make sure the stitches are secure. You can even put your fingers in there and put some tension on it to make sure that you don't have big holes. That's another way that I check to make sure you don't want to skip too far down. So if I placed a stitch here and I skipped all the way down the front border down here, then you're going to feel those openings in your pocket. If you stick your hand in there, you'll be able to stick your finger through. So a good way to check as you're going through your progress is to actually put your finger into the pocket and see if you can stick your finger through that seam. And that's going to help you know if you're putting your stitches close enough together. All right, so I am probably going to speed up the rest of this video as I go through this, but you can see my process as I work my way around. All right, once you get confident with your stitch placement and you get pretty comfortable with feeling out your stitches, you can change to the way that I was doing it just then, where I'm actually going all the way straight through from the pocket through to the back side of the front border. So if you're feeling confident with your stitching and you don't want to have to go through the front pocket and then through the front border, you don't have to. You can go straight through. So I have made it to my corner here, and I'm going to be able to now remove this bottom corner stitch marker. And I am going to place a couple of stitches here. So since I went back to front on this one, for this one, I may actually go around. So I came through the front. I may actually wrap this around and go all the way from the back side to the front side again, just to add even more stability. And with this yarn, since you can't really see that stitch there, I don't mind that it's actually wrapping around the outside there. Okay, so now I'm on to the last one. Again, I'm going to take a moment and check in and make sure that everything is still laying nice and flat. We have a nice flat border here where it's attached to the front border. And now I am going to start working across the bottom here. So let's see. Okay, so I just need to find my next space. For this first one, I am going to go through the front pocket first, and then I'm going to flip it open and find a nice opening on the end of that the bottom of the front border. Okay, so from here, I am going to show you though, I'm going to go all the way from one side to the other. So I'm going to find the next space, and I'm just going to push my tapestry needle all the way through from back to front and come through that way. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to find the next opening and make sure that I've got a nice grip on the yarn and pull that all the way through. And I'm going to do this all the way across the bottom. There we go. Front to back, back to front. It's a little bit easier on the bottom because I can really see what I'm looking at here, the way that this is facing me. And you can always turn your work. So if it's easier for you to have the seam facing you, you could turn your entire jacket so that this side was facing you. It's all about being comfortable. You know, if it works for you to work at a table or have something in your lap, I find that this kind of work, any kind of seaming, it's nice to have a good foundation. So I tend to do a lot of my seaming type of work at a table. Just to give me a little bit better stability and, you know, really being able to press down on my work and it not be a little lopsided just from being in my lap. All right, checking in again, making sure that this seam is staying nice and straight. This tail here was from the other side of my pocket, so I'm going to end up tucking this into the pocket. All right, I am at my final corner. So I can remove my final, oh, I have one more stitch marker. There we go. All right, so again on this corner, I ended up here, but I'm actually going to take my yarn around the edge and go back to front again, just to loop that yarn and give that corner a little more stability. Again, you may not be able to do this with all yarn because it may be a little too obvious and it may look a little funny, but because this yarn is so fluffy, I like to add a little bit more stability with that extra stitch going all the way around the edge and back through, because I don't think you can really notice it as much here. All right, so for this, I am going to turn my work just a little bit so it's easier for me to see what's happening. And this side, I'm going to kind of hold my work like this. So I'm going to put my hand underneath this so I can feel what's happening. So for this one, I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to go front to back just through the pocket first, pull that through, and then I'm going to find the space on the bottom border to pull that yarn through. Okay. I'm going to hit one more corner. So I'm going to go back to front in the very edge just to add one more stabilizing stitch. And again, this is kind of work as you go. If you feel like it needs an extra stitch there or a little extra something, you can do that. There are really no rules. You know, you can play it by ear and do what seems right for your project. So that time I went all the way through from the front into the back, and I'm going to flip this over and make sure that I go through a space that's not where I came out of, and then go straight up to the front. So this is a lot about the feel. I'm kind of feeling for my stitches, making sure that I'm going through a different space for each one, and kind of watching where the needle is coming out to make sure that I'm in the right spot. And don't be afraid, you know, you may have to pull a stitch out and start back over. That is perfectly fine, especially if you have not done a lot of seaming. Okay, I have gotten to this final stitch marker. I'm actually going to try to go through the same space as the stitch marker before I remove it. So I'm going front to back, pulling it out through the back side, and then I'm going to place it one down from that, which would be up on the other side. And then again, see, this one actually came out too high. So instead of pulling the needle all the way out, I'm just going to push the needle back and make sure that it's coming out into the pocket. There we go. Now that is secure, so I'm going to remove my final stitch marker. There we go. And I'm probably going to place, let's see, if I lay this flat, I see that this is nice and secure here. This looks great, but I am going to go underneath. I'm going to go higher up. So I'm going to come, this is where I landed. I'm going to come up one stitch and I'm going to go through that. And then I'm going to put my hand under here to make sure that I don't actually scoop up a stitch from the back panel and attach the front of my cardigan to the back, because I have done that before. And then I'm going to watch where my needle comes out. And I'm going to try to get it to come out at the top of this pocket. And then I'm going to pull that through for another stabilizing stitch for that corner. Okay, and now here's a little trick that I like to do with my ends, because these are not fun ends to try to weave in because of the consistency of the yarn. So what I'm going to do is I am going to weave these ends in to where they come together, to where this end and this end will come close enough together that I can actually tie them into a knot. So this is pretty easy with this yarn because you just need to weave it. So I am going to go in and out of stitches, moving this yarn across the front, not pulling it too tight, because again, that's going to actually warp your piece. So you want it to be tight enough to not see loops coming out like this one, but not tight enough to actually start pulling on your work. And I'm just going to find a couple of spaces to get this close enough and to have enough space left to tie them together. And then I'm actually going to take this yarn to the back inside the pocket. And now I'm going to put this other end right here onto my tapestry needle. And I'm going to work it closer in so that it will be close enough to that other end to tie into a knot. Okay. All right, now I'm going to turn my pocket inside out carefully, just being gentle, because it's not going to turn all the way inside out, but just inside out enough to where I can see both of these ends coming out. Now they're not quite close enough for me to want to tie a knot yet. So I'm going to, where did my needle go? There we go. I'm going to thread this back through the tapestry needle, and I am going to get this just a little bit closer. So I'm just going underneath another stitch here, and let's do one more. Let's go underneath one more stitch here. Now they're nice and close. You don't want them coming through the same hole, but you want them nice and close to each other so you can see how far apart they are. And then I'm going to do my handy dandy double knot. I guess it would be called a quadruple knot because I actually cross things over twice. So I'm going to cross, let me cut this a little bit shorter actually. Where did my scissors go? There they are. All right, I'm going to cut this end a little shorter because I don't need all of that length. All right, so I've got these two ends. I'm going to cross them over, and I'm going to cross through once and cross under again, and then pull tight, not too tight, just tight enough. And then I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to take that around once, take it around again, and this time I'm going to knot it a little bit more aggressively. I'm going to pull a lot tighter. And then if you want to do a third knot, you can do cross once, cross twice, pull tight for that third piece. And since this is inside the pocket, I'm able to leave a bit of length there. Okay, so you can actually see these little strands here, but that's going to be inside the pocket, so you're not going to see that. But that took care of my ends, and now you have your pocket here that you can put your hand into. So I hope you found this helpful. You would repeat this on the other side. See, I've got my other one, and I left this nice long tail. And if you're wondering how to measure how long to make your tail, the way that I usually do it that ensures that I always have more than enough length that I need is I take the yarn, and I know that I'm going to need to sew across the top, across the bottom, across here, and then up this side. So I want to double that amount. So when I was getting ready to cut this yarn, I placed it along the edge here, and I doubled it. So then I went back the direction I came. And for this one, I even left a little bit extra. But usually if I trace around where I'm needing to sew twice, so I went around once, came back around, and then I clip, that usually leaves me more than enough yarn to do what I need to do with sewing that in. So you would place this right here, and then you would sew this strand all the way around. You can use, like I said, you can use stitch markers to keep it in place, or you can take some contrasting yarn and use your tapestry needle and tie knots on the edges, or just, you know, bows, not double knots that you can't get untied. But I guess you could, you know, cut it with scissors. But I hope you found this helpful. I hope you enjoy this pattern if you're working on this pattern, or if you're a designer trying to figure out a cool way to add pockets. I hope this was helpful as well. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. If you did, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe if you don't want to miss any tips, tricks, or tutorials coming up in the future. Thank you so much again for joining in and for your support. And until next time, happy hooking!